Biggest game of the college football weekend, number 5 Indiana at number 2 Ohio State. Big Ten championship implications on the line in Columbus. Indiana can clinch a spot with a win. Ohio State, they've won 29 straight meetings versus Indiana since 1988. First drive for the Hoosiers, first and goal from the 2. Wildcat formation, Tyson Lawton powers his way into the end zone. Indiana up 7-0, their first lead versus Ohio State since 2018. Ensuing Ohio State drive near the goal line, 4th and 1 from the 2. Quinshon Judkins gets the head off, but he's stuffed. Indiana with a goal line stop. What a start for the Hoosiers at the shoe, but the Buckeyes, you know they're going to bounce back. Next drive, Howard connects with Emeka Egbuka. 11-yard touchdown there, ties the game at 7. Ibuka's 9th of the season. Howard started 14 of 14, best start in his career. Ensuing Indiana drive, Cody Simon sacks Curtis Rourke. He loses the ball. Ohio State falls on top of it, and they take over. Rourke's 7th turnover of the season sets up Ohio State with great field position. 3 plays later, Howard avoids pressure, tries to get it to Jelani Thurman, but it's tipped and intercepted by Jalen Walker. Indiana takes back over. Both teams exchanging turnovers. Less than 2 minutes to go before the half. Indiana punting it away, but James Evans muffs the snap, tries to punt it away, but gets tackled. Ohio State again set up with great field position, trying to take their first lead of the game. Ensuing drive, Travion Henderson powers his way into the end zone. Ohio State up 14-7 at the half. First lead of the game for the Buckeyes. First time the Hoosiers trailed at the half all season. First drive of the second half, Hoosiers punting. Caleb Downs feels it on the bounce, spins and turns on the Jets down the sideline. He's going to cut it back inside all the way to the house. 79-yard touchdown. Ohio State up 21-7. First punt return touchdown since 2014, also versus Indiana, almost 10 years to the day. Next Ohio State drive, play action. Howard hits Thurman for the touchdown. 28-7, 28 unanswered points for the Buckeyes. Thurman's first career touchdown. Late third quarter, Rourke drops back, immediately gets sacked by Jack Sawyer. Rourke was sacked 5 times, completed only 8 passes in the game. 38 seconds to go. Howard takes it up the middle for the touchdown. It was 31-15 at that point, then 38-15 there. Ohio State goes on to win it. Kurt Cignetti not happy with the late score. As you see the reaction there from Howard. 30th straight win versus Indiana since 1988. 17th straight win versus Indiana in Columbus. Longest win streak between conference opponents in Big Ten history. And Indiana suffers their first loss this season. Snaps their 10-game win streak. For Ohio State, they've won 13 straight. 26 of the last 27 at home. 148 total yards allowed. That is the fewest allowed versus a ranked opponent since 2007 for Ohio State. Get some reaction from our panel here back in our HQ studios. Jeremy St. Louis, Damian Harris, Mackenzie Brooks, and Danny Kanell. Look, going into this game, the thought was that Ohio State was the better team, that there's a different class here, and they were going to show Indiana the way. As it turns out, Indiana started good, but Ohio State, a good team, takes a minute to get rolling. And Damian, when they got rolling, Indiana, pardon me, just couldn't stop them. Well,
Ohio State got rolling, but it was because of Indiana. I think, one, not protecting Curtis Rourke. I mean, you said it. He only completed 8 passes. He was under pressure all game long. And then I look at what they did on special teams. A muffed or a drop punt or a drop snap on the punt by the punter, and then you allow a touchdown on a punt return. Your special teams unit didn't show up to play. Your offensive line didn't show up to protect your quarterback. You couldn't get the run game established. Couldn't really do anything on offense. And then your defense is just playing catch-up after a certain point where they're just trying their hardest to stop the onslaught. Well, it's already began because you had a couple plays here and there that should have been easily executed with just clear fundamentals as catching a snap, punting the ball away, then giving your defense good field position. But instead, when you do things like this and you give Ohio State the ball inside the 5-yard line, what do you expect your defense to do? There was too many things like that for Indiana today, and that's what allowed the game to open up for Ohio State. It wasn't really anything that Ohio State did that was phenomenal outside of get to Curtis Rourke, but really Indiana just kind of gave this game away, and then once Ohio State started to separate, Indiana just couldn't catch up.
I just think it's so funny how we use that 20-point threshold, myself included, as like, okay, is this a blowout? Is this not? Of course the game ends right around that 20 points, right? And you could say, oh, well, Indiana had some garbage time points, but you could also say, oh, well, Indiana also kept it close in the first quarters. There's so many different ways you can look at this game. It's interesting to see what the committee will want to do here. I could see the committee saying we don't need to see a game script like this again in the playoff, the way that they just got blown out by Ohio State through 4 quarters of football. I know my opinion doesn't matter too much here, but that is the interesting conversation that we'll see happen from the committee.
Your opinion matters way more than you think, because it gets me irritated, it gets me mad, it makes me want to fight for Indiana. I'll say this, we've spent a lot of time focusing on Indiana's lack of success offensively. Their defense did a pretty good job against Ohio State. Yeah. Ohio State was held to their second lowest total yardage production of the season. They held them to fewer total yards than Penn State did and Oregon. Like, Ohio State put up pretty big points on both of those teams, and no one's complaining about them. I think 2 plays were the difference. The fumbled snap from the punter and the punt return. Like, you gifted them 14 points, and that's right around the number. Hey, that's the game. Those are the breaks. Like, you still screwed up and made those plays, and you allowed them. But I think it was better for them defensively than I think a lot of people would have given them credit for.
Absolutely.
And, like, the Ohio State's offense is supposed to be this juggernaut with the super backs in the backfield with Jeremiah Smith and Mecca Buka, and they did score points. But I think Indiana's defense is one that actually represented pretty well, which is getting overlooked because the offense looks so inept.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I just think it's interesting because we're saying Ohio State's offense didn't put up a great game, and I know we've talked about this before, but it's like Ohio State didn't even play to the caliber of Ohio State football, right? And we still saw the box score at the end of this game that we saw. Like, Indiana didn't even get the best version of Ohio State. Or was it Indiana's defense was that awesome? Maybe I'm wrong there, but it's interesting that...
Well, why don't we give that benefit of the doubt for Indiana? Like, that's the worst version I've seen of Indiana. Why don't we talk about them that way?
No, that's fair. I'm just saying,
like,
it's interesting that this is not the best version of Ohio State.
Maybe that's because they played Indiana's defense.
And
Or is this Ohio State's best on offense?
Right, exactly.
In my opinion, my humble opinion, it is. It's not. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Ken. I'm being on the table because I'm not.
All right, so here's the thing. I think there's parity all across college football. I swear, we've seen a lot of games like this.
Florida,
we've seen Georgia look bad. We've seen Alabama look bad. We've seen Tennessee look bad. We saw Oregon look bad against Wisconsin. I think there's more parity, which is going to make for a phenomenal 12-team playoff once we get there. Now, the arguments to get there over who looks good and who looks bad make it even insanely tough on the committee to try to decipher who are the best 12 teams in college football.
And based off history, I'm not saying it's the just way, but some conferences will benefit from there being parity, and some conferences will not benefit from them being parity. If there's parity in the Big 12 and the best team looks as bad as the worst team, that's a very red flag. As you just said, maybe the SEC, sometimes they get the benefit of the doubt where, oh, the whole conference is awesome, and now you all look better.
Well, yes, because to that point with the parity in the SEC, and we're looking at, okay, is the best team in the SEC really that much better than the worst team? Which, I mean, Missouri or Mississippi State, yes. But, like, once you look at, like, 8 or 9, it's not that interchangeable. But as opposed to the Big 10 or the Big 12, we look at the SEC, at least me, in my humble opinion, and say, well, no, the SEC is just still the dominant conference. Like, the talent disparity is getting closer from the top to the bottom, but it's only still in the best conference. I can't say that about the Big 10. I can't say that about the Big 12.
I think what's killing the Big 10 is that it's too top-heavy. Like, you have those 4 teams at the top, which I would include Indiana, and that's where I think they get, bashed because they played the lower.
Closer to the top than the bottom.
For sure. And then there's a big drop-off in the rest, and I think that's where it's probably hurting the Big 10. Maybe in some ways it's helping them because they end up getting their 4 best in because they've all been able to beat up on those programs that aren't even close. It does help them.
I think Penn State deserves to get some heat as well. Like, Penn State's the epitome of a team that will always beat the teams under them and will never beat the teams above them. Like, wherever Penn State is seated in this playoff, that's exactly as far as they're going to go until they are the underdog in that game, and that's kind of the issue with the Big 10 right now.
Indiana head coach Curt Cignetti was asked after the game if his team should be one of the 12 teams under consideration for the playoff, and his response was, quote, "Is that a serious question? The answer is so obvious," end quote. So,
what do we expect
sitting at 7, sitting at 7, what do you think the committee does here? Where do they go? Do they fall out of the 12? Stay in the 25, or do you think they still stay in the 12?
I think now with an Ole Miss loss, one more SEC team to worry about, that was so massive for this Indiana team. We could have had the discussion they possibly were out of it completely. I don't think that will be the case, especially when we have 4 distinct SEC teams right now. Now, we haven't seen Texas A&M play Texas yet, but as it stands and how favored Texas is in that game, I'd say we have our 4 SEC teams, and that opens up the door for a 4th Big 10 team in Indiana. So I think it should be a lower seed. I think it should probably be like a 10, 11, 12, but I do think they should be in the playoff with only 4 SEC teams.
By the way, Penn State is in front of them. They are down 7-0 as we speak to Minnesota. So there are other teams that still have to play that we kind of, Texas, you mentioned that. We have to see how it goes. I think what will be interesting, and this is what I would caution to every single team. Like, if you're Indiana and you're at 11 after today, don't feel like you're safe. And if you're at 13 or 14, don't think you're out. Because that's the one thing the committee has shown, is they can shake things up when everybody thinks you know what they're going to do. We still have no idea how they're going to treat conference champion losers.
Right.
That is the great unknown that we don't know, and that's one that could determines Indiana's fate. Like if you see a blowout in other champion, the ACC championship, for example, that could be a spot that Indiana gets. If you see a close game in the ACC championship game, that could be a spot that is taken away from Indiana. So there's still a lot to be played, but I think they'll be right on that bubble after this game.
It's amazing. Like, it's our first time with the 12 seed playoff. It's the committee's first time. It's odds makers' first time. And every time I sit here and think I have it figured out, like I told you, I just listed our 4 SEC teams. I'm sure next week I'm going to be sitting here saying, oh, Texas isn't even in the playoff. Like, all I've learned this season as somebody who's watching this day in and day out and watching the lines and the playoff odds and the implications, like, it is so hard to say it's over until it's really over at the end of this season.
One of the things we do know, in terms of the ACC, SMU clinched a berth in the ACC title game today. Mustangs making money. Let's talk about Ohio State here, because the job's not done for them in terms of getting to the title game. They need to win out. So next week they have the game against Michigan. So for Ryan Day, this was a big win for him, big win for Indiana, but now they still have Michigan. Not to say that this is any Michigan team that's going to put any kind of a big challenge on them, because we've seen what Michigan's done this year.
Well,
but at the same time, to Danny's point, we've seen parity, so the job's not done.
And we've also seen Ryan Day lose to Michigan 3 times already. So
he's looking forward to this game for sure.
The proof is in the pudding. And I remember we've had Beanie up here, we've had Cardell both sit up here and say the game that is circled on the people who sign Ryan Day's paycheck, the circle is around the Michigan game and getting to the playoffs. So if you lose to Michigan, let me ask you this before I continue my statement. If Ohio State loses to Michigan, what do you see there? What's their path?
If Ohio State loses to Michigan, I do not think they would be in the conference would Penn State be in the conference championship?
Do you think they
still?
still?
Ohio State
let me look at the scenarios.
because they have the head-to-head to Penn State.
No, but that would have been their second
That would
conference
have been their
loss.
second conference loss, and with
so it would be Penn State.
and then with them not playing in the Big, they're one of the 4 teams.
Okay,
to
so
get
here,
in, right?
Oh, yeah.
Hang on. So here's the scenario, okay? We have 10 different scenarios for the Big Ten going into this weekend. This would be scenario 2. Oregon beats Washington. Penn State wins out. Indiana loses to Ohio State and beats Purdue, finishes 8-1. Ohio State beats Indiana and then loses to Michigan. That would mean that Oregon would face either Penn State or Indiana in the title game. That 2 seed determined by cumulative conference with a percentage of their conference opponents. It's a lot of math. But
Interesting.
to say that, though, like Ohio State, they still have to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible what we've seen in parity. It's definitely possible for them to lose to Michigan. And then once we start to get in the Big Ten conversation, then the CFP conversation, then we have the bigger conversation about Ryan Day as a whole. Because if you lose to Michigan and you somehow miss out on the Big Ten championship and you don't win a national championship to make up for that, like I said, Beanie and Cardell have both sat up here and said it might be time to start questioning Ryan Day.
Right, but the other story surrounding the playoff, and this is something that Lane Kiffin has talked about, is the fact that you don't necessarily want to play in the title game. Maybe you want the bye.
Do not start this narrative. I hate, and I don't like to use the word hate. I hate that Lane Kiffin went out and said that, because
it should have never been spoken.
Why are we? In what?
He's not afraid to say the quiet part out loud.
In what world did we start to diminish conference championships? Because if I remember correctly, whenever I played and we talked about being a championship caliber program, it started with your conference, and then it went on to winning a national championship. And now we're sitting here talking about, okay, well, do we want to play for a conference title, or do we rather have a bye and let 2 other teams beat up on each other and then, go to the CFP playoff? That is, it's absurd to me. I get why.
It's a flaw in the system. I don't think they really took that into consideration when they started making the 12-team playoff. I really think that was a flaw in what they were trying to do, but I understand why it could happen and why teams do feel that way. Now, obviously, I am not an ex-football player, if nobody knew that at home, but I have to imagine, having a bye earlier, getting the momentum of the first and second round. If it's going to be easier games, you're looking at, if Ohio State was the 5 seed, they get to play BYU, then Boise State. That's not a terrible spot to be in.
Here's what I'll say, because I agree with both of you. I think as a player or as a coach, there's no way you're thinking I'm going to try to manipulate this or rest players so that I get the 3rd place. But if you do, I think it is a huge advantage. Yeah. Like Penn State. If Penn State wins today and they're the 3rd best team in the Big Ten and they're in and they host a playoff game and they get to rest Big Ten championship weekend, that's huge.
Perfect.
You know what Lane Kiffin's problem was, is he was thinking he was probably going to be that 3rd best team in the SEC. And he took his eyes off the prize and started talking and giving everybody fodder and didn't take care of business in Gainesville. I've seen that happen a lot throughout the last 10, 15 years in college football. The minute you take your eyes off of doing what you're supposed to do today is a lot of times the minute that your season is gone in the toilet, and that's what happened.
That's why we talk about on this show every single week. How do you control your own destiny? By going 1-0 each and every week. You don't worry about anything else. You don't worry about who's sneaking up behind you. You don't worry about who's in front of you. You worry about the team that you face between those white lines. It's 120 yards long and 53 yards wide. You worry about the team that you are playing in that particular moment, and then worry about the rest when you get there. Or else you're going to have a situation like what just happened to Lane and Ole Miss.
I think the ACC is the only conference I can confidently say you have got to get to that championship game to guarantee your spot here. You're lucky to even get in as a runner-up potentially. Now, I think if Clemson keeps looking good, if they can beat South Carolina, they just bring up the integrity and the merit of the ACC in general, we could see that runner-up from the ACC, but that is the one conference where I'm like, you definitely want to make that conference game to have any type of playoff hope.
Can I just say that every time Damian speaks and starts talking about, you know, the tactical aspects of the game, it's just Nick Saban.
Right? It really is.
It's him and Bill, man. My standards are a little high. My expectations are up here. When I say I want to see a good football team, I want to see something. Or when I have expectations, it's just because I'm a product of a system that clearly worked.
Yeah.
And then let's say that.
You need to go into coaching, my guy.
Maybe down the line.
Maybe down the line.
Listen, Jamie, I just got here. Stop trying to run me off already. I just got here. Man.
Okay, no, come on, man. I love you. You know, you know that. Ohio State, big win today. 38-15 over Indiana. Indiana falling from the unbeatens in college football. It's now Oregon and Army. And you see Ohio State versus top 5 teams. Their only loss was Oregon. Beat Penn State, beat Indiana.